The long night. The wind outside screamed like a living thing. It howled through gaps in the sheet metal walls, rattling the loose panel above the cot where Lyra sat hunched over her child. She pressed the last wool blanket tighter around him, feeling the tremor in his tiny body. His breath was shallow but steady, warm puffs against her collarbone. The heater in the corner gave a pitiful click, then fell silent. She could see her own breath now, curling in pale ribbons toward the ceiling before dissolving into the darkness. Lyra shut her eyes. She could almost imagine this was just another long night on the rim, like back on the mining station where she'd grown up. Storms raging outside, warmth and light inside. But there was no light here, only the dull glow of a chemical lantern, its charge nearly gone. The weather reports had promised the worst of the blizzard would pass in 3 days. That had been 2 weeks ago. On this planet, long night wasn't a figure of speech. Its tilted axis meant that once winter arrived, the sun abandoned them for 100 days straight. Without the supply drops, without functioning geothermal, the cold didn't just creep in, it conquered. She glanced at the ration box by the door. It held a single 4-wrap square of nutrient gel. She'd saved it for her son, even though she hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Her stomach twisted painfully. She ignored it. It was strange, the way desperation stripped away everything but the one thing that mattered. She could have listed 100 reasons to give up. The cold, the hunger, the loneliness. But every time she looked at that small, round face, blue eyes blinking up at her, she knew she couldn't. Not until she'd done everything possible. Her husband, Ren, had been the one who convinced her to come here. A fresh start, he'd said, when the mining company collapsed and the credits dried up. No buses, no rent, no crowded stations. Just our own land and the sky above us. Now he was buried in that land, the frozen earth closing over him before the storm rolled in. Lyra tightened her grip around the baby. The wind's pitch changed, rising like a shriek, and the walls shuddered under the assault. Snow sifted in through the warped door frame, settling in a thin white dust over the floor. She thought she saw something in the storm once, a faint light, drifting like a will-o-wisp. Maybe a reflection off the ice. Maybe just her mind conjuring what she wished for. No one else would be out there, not in this cold. Her fingers were stiff and pale, the nails tinged purple. She rubbed her son's back through the blanket, trying to push her own warmth into him. She'd run the numbers in her head earlier. At this temperature, without heat, she had maybe 3 hours before she would stop shivering. After that, the cold would sink into her bones, slow her heart, and finally silence it. Her son, maybe another hour after her. The lantern gutted, then dimmed to a dull red glow. She didn't have the energy to replace the cell. Her breathing slowed. It felt peaceful, almost. She leaned her cheek against the soft fuzz of her child's head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, almost too quiet to hear over the wind. "I wanted to give you more than this. I wanted to see you grow." Her eyes grew heavy. She imagined herself lying on the warm deck plates of the station nursery, drifting off to the hum of life support. She could almost smell the metallic tang of recycled air, hear Ren laughing from the next room. The wind outside faltered for a heartbeat. She thought she heard something else, a faint crunch of footsteps in the snow. No, it had to be her mind playing tricks. The sound came again, heavier this time, closer. Her pulse flickered weakly. Could it be another colonist? But there were no other settlements within 100 kilometers. The latch on the door rattled. Snow swirled in as it cracked open. A figure loomed in the threshold, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in something that shimmered faintly even in the dying lantern light. The air seemed to bend around him, heat radiating off in waves. She couldn't focus. Her vision blurred, the edges darkening. She thought she saw a flash of eyes, not human eyes, glinting in the shadows. The figure stepped inside, shutting the door with a solid thud. A deep, unfamiliar voice murmured something in a language she didn't understand. She felt movement, then weight as something heavy settled over her and the child. A thick, warm cloak that trapped her fading body heat. The last thing she knew before darkness claimed her was the sensation of strong arms lifting them both, the cold retreating in the presence of a heat unlike anything she'd felt in weeks. And then, silence. Cold's final claim. Lyra floated somewhere between waking and sleep. At first, she thought she was back in the nursery on the mining station, warm air circulating, a soft hum filling the room. But then the hum shifted, deepened, more like a growl than a machine. She blinked. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The walls of the shelter loomed around her, still pitted and frost-rimed. The lantern lay dark beside her cot, and she was warm. Heat wrapped around her like a living thing, seeping into her stiff limbs. The weight on her shoulders was unfamiliar, a thick cloak, heavier than anything she owned, smelling faintly of metal and smoke. Her son stirred against her chest. She instinctively shifted him closer, fingers checking for the steady rise and fall of his breath. Still alive, still warm. Memory flooded back. The dying heater, the snow through the doorframe, the shadow in the blizzard. The figure. She turned her head. The stranger sat across the narrow room, crouched beside a small device that glowed with a low, steady light. It wasn't a fire, but it radiated heat in waves. The frost on the walls nearest it had already melted into rivulets, dripping down the metal panels. The stranger's size was the first thing that struck her. He was massive, shoulders almost brushing the ceiling when he'd first entered. The second was his armor. It wasn't standard issue for any human faction she knew. Matte black plates covered his chest and arms, etched with faint patterns that caught the light. His helmet sat on the floor beside him, revealing a face unlike any she had seen before. His skin was mottled, a mix of pale stone gray and deep charcoal, textured almost like rock. His eyes glowed faintly, not bright, but enough to catch her attention. They were the color of molten metal, and they were watching her. "You are awake," he said. His voice was low, with a strange cadence, as though he had learned the words from listening rather than speaking them. Her throat was dry. "Who are you?" The stranger tilted his head, as if considering the question. "Karen," he said at last, pronouncing it with a sharp, clipped rhythm. "I pass through. I find you. Find me." She remembered the storm outside, the impossible cold. "Why? There's nothing out there for anyone." Karen looked down at the glowing device. "You were dying." The way he said it, factual, unshaken, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Lyra pulled the cloak tighter around her son. "If you knew that, you also know you could have frozen to death getting hay." The faintest curve touched one corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "I do not freeze." She tried to make sense of him. He didn't move like a human. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, as if he weighed twice what he appeared to. "You're not," she began, then stopped herself. There was no point pretending. "You're not from here." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Not from this place. Not from your kind." The air between them seemed to thicken. She'd heard stories, rumors of non-human ships skirting the edge of colonized space. Most people dismissed them. Others claimed they were watching, waiting. "Why are you here?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned his gaze to the child in her arms. "I was ordered not to be here, not to help." But his eyes locked on Hayes again. "You hold the child. You do not stop." She didn't know what to say to that. The truth was simple. She hadn't stopped because she couldn't. That was all. He rose to his full height, towering over her. The cloak slipped from her shoulders for a moment, letting in a bite of the shelter's chill before he adjusted it again. "You will not live if you stay here," Karen said. "Storm grows. Cold deeper. You must move." Lyra shook her head. "Move where? There's nothing nearby. No settlements. No shelter. We'd never make it." His gaze didn't waver. "With me, you will." She wanted to argue. She wanted to demand answers. Who he was, what he wanted, why he'd broken his own orders to help. But the memory of that creeping frost, of her son's slowing breath, told her she had no choice. "How far?" she asked. Karen turned toward the door. "Far enough. But we must go, soon." The glowing device by his feet pulsed once, then dimmed slightly. She guessed it wouldn't burn forever. She adjusted her grip on her son and stood. Her knees buckled at the sudden shift from warmth to movement, and Karen caught her before she could fall. His hands were steady, the surface of his gloves faintly warm. Outside, the storm still raged, snow whipping in endless waves. She could barely see beyond the first few meters. Karen stepped through the doorway first, letting the cloak shield her from the worst of the wind as he guided her forward. His steps were purposeful, unhurried despite the chaos around them. For the first time in weeks, Lyra felt the smallest thread of something she hadn't dared to hold on to. Hope. The stranger's warmth. The storm swallowed them whole. Snow lashed her cheeks like shards of glass, each breath burning in her lungs. The cloak Karen had draped over her and the baby trapped the heat from his strange fire device, but the cold still bit at her toes and fingers. The wind howled so loudly that Lyra could barely hear her own breathing. Karen moved ahead of her, each stride breaking through drifts that would have stopped her in place. His back was broad, his silhouette cutting a sharp, immovable shape against the swirling white. In one arm, he carried the baby, cradling him as if the child weighed nothing at all. At first she protested. She didn't trust him enough to let her son out of her arms. But the reality was harsh and simple. Karen could shield the boy better, and Lyra needed both arms to keep her balance. How far? She called, her voice ripped away by the wind. Karen turned slightly, the faint glow of his eyes cutting through the white haze. 3 hours, maybe less. Less was still too long. Her legs ached already, muscles screaming from the effort of wading through waist-deep drifts. They walked in silence for a while, her thoughts narrowing to the rhythm of movement. Step, lift, step. Anything more was too exhausting to think about. Finally, she asked, "Why were you out here?" Karen didn't answer right away. "I was sent to watch." "Watch what?" He glanced at her again. "Your kind." Her stomach tightened. "You mean humans?" "Yes." The wind seemed colder somehow. "You've been spying on us." "Observing," he corrected. "Learning. Deciding." "Deciding what?" He didn't hesitate this time. "If you are worth leaving alone." Her chest clenched. "And if we're not?" Karen's eyes lingered on her for a long moment before he faced forward again. "Then we take what you have." Lyra's pulse spiked, but before she could speak, he added, "I think your kind survives in ways my kind does not understand. This is why I stopped." She wasn't sure if that was meant as a comfort, but the fact that he'd gone against his orders, that he'd chosen to help at all, planted a stubborn seed of curiosity alongside her fear. They pressed on. The wind rose, forcing them to stop and crouch against the gusts more than once. Each pause left her shivering harder, but Karen seemed unaffected, as if the storm were no more than a passing inconvenience. At one such stop, he shifted the baby gently, adjusting the cloak to shield him from the icy air. Lyra noticed how careful his movements were, deliberate, controlled, as though he'd studied how humans held their young. "You have children?" she asked before she could stop herself. Karen shook his head. "No, my kind does not keep them the same way." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "We raise them in groups. They are all children of all. No single mother. No single father." "That sounds lonely," she said without thinking. "It is not," he replied. "It is different." Then he looked down at the baby, who slept despite the storm's fury. "But this is different too." For the next hour, they spoke little. Her mind churned, torn between exhaustion and the quiet questions piling up in her head. What kind of people was Karen from? Why was he here alone? And why, if he thought humans might be a threat, did he seem almost respectful? Eventually, the faint outline of a structure emerged through the snow, the skeletal remains of a comms tower, half collapsed under years of storms. Karen led her inside the leaning frame, where metal walls blocked most of the wind. Snow drifted in through gaps, but it was still warmer than outside. He set the baby back in her arms and unpacked another of his strange devices, a small sphere that unfolded into a flat panel glowing with steady, silent heat. "You rest," he said. "We go again when wind is less." She sank against the wall, cradling her son. Why are you doing this? She asked finally. If your people told you not to help us, why risk it? Karen's gaze met hers. There was no hesitation in his voice. Because I saw a mother in the storm who would not stop, even when she knew she would die. I have seen soldiers turn away from battles they could win, but I have not seen that. Her throat tightened. She didn't know if it was pride, grief, or both that made it hard to breathe. Karen rose and moved to the entrance, scanning the white void beyond. You will live, he said quietly, and your child will live. This is enough. She held her son closer, feeling the warmth from Karen's device seep into her bones. For the first time since Ren's death, she let herself believe those words might be true. The walk through the storm. The wind did not stop. They waited in the shadow of the ruined comms tower for 3 hours, hoping the storm would ease. It never did. The snow fell in endless waves, blotting out the world beyond a few meters. The wind was a constant wall of sound, pressing in on the shelter's thin walls. Karen stood at the entrance, his cloak snapping in the gale, watching the storm the way a predator watches prey. Lyra had begun to think he might decide to wait another night, and she wouldn't have argued when he turned abruptly. We go, he said. She blinked. Now, it's worse than before. He shook his head. It will be worse still in 2 hours. We move while we can. She wanted to protest, but the edge in his voice silenced her. She slung the cloak over her shoulders, securing her son against her chest, and followed him into the white. The cold hit like a physical blow. The brief warmth of the tower vanished in seconds. Karen moved ahead, breaking a path through the drifts, each step deliberate. Lyra focused on his back, using it as her anchor against the blinding snow. They didn't speak for the first half hour. The wind stole breath and words alike. Every step was a battle, her boots sinking deep, her legs burning. Finally, she shouted, "Where are we going?" Karen didn't slow. Geothermal station. Abandoned, but still working enough. How far? He hesitated, just long enough for her stomach to sink. 2 hours if we are strong. 2 hours felt impossible, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. When they stopped for a brief rest, Karen handed her a metal flask. The liquid inside was warm, thick, and faintly sweet. What is it? She asked, sipping despite his suspicion. Fuel, he said simply. Full body. Drink. The warmth spread through her chest, dulling the ache in her muscles. Her son shifted under the cloak, letting out a soft, contented sigh. Karen watched her, his molten eyes steady. You are not weak, he said. She huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. Feels like it. No, he said, shaking his head. You carry life through death. My people do not understand this. They see it as waste. Lyra frowned. Then they don't understand anything worth knowing. A flicker of something passed over his face. Amusement, maybe, or respect. They pushed on. The storm intensified, the snow driving so hard it stung her skin through the fabric. Karen shifted closer, using his body as a shield. She realized, with a jolt, that he was taking the brunt of the wind to protect her and the baby. At one point, the ground fell away without warning, a deep ravine hidden beneath the snow. Karen stopped just in time, his arm shooting out to pull her back. Careful, he warned. Storm hides the ground. They detoured along the edge until they found a natural bridge, a frozen shelf of snow and ice. Karen crossed first, testing each step before waving her forward. Her legs trembled as she crossed, but his steady presence on the far side pulled her onward. After another hour, she began to see shapes in the distance, jagged, unnatural against the rolling white. Pipes, towers, the faint skeleton of the geothermal station. We're close, Karen said. Relief surged in her chest, but it didn't last. A deep, distant rumble rolled through the storm. Karen froze, scanning the horizon. What is it? She asked. Not storm, he said, his voice a gun sharp. Machines. She followed his gaze and caught faint, dark shapes moving in the snow. Too fast, too steady to be human. Yours? She asked. He shook his head once. Mine. They track me. Orders to return. Her gut tightened. And if you don't? Karen glanced at her son, then back at the approaching shapes. Then they take me, and they leave you. The implication was clear and deadly. Without another word, he picked up the pace, almost forcing her to jog through the drifts. The station grew closer, details emerging, rust-stained pipes, half-buried doors, vents belching faint wisps of steam. The machines behind them drew nearer, spider-like constructs of black metal, legs stabbing into the snow. Their eyes glowed the same molten color as Karen's. "They won't hurt you if they catch us?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "They will not care," Karen said. The station's main entrance was blocked by a slab of ice. Without slowing, Karen dropped the pack from his shoulder, pulled a small cylindrical device, and slammed it against the ice. A hiss of vapor filled the air as the ice cracked and fell away. "Inside," he barked. She darted through the doorway into a narrow metal corridor. The warmth hit instantly, the geothermal core still pumping heat through the bones of the building. Karen followed, sealing the door behind them just as the first machine crested the rise outside. The clang of metal against metal echoed through the storm. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing hard in the sudden quiet. The air inside smelled of rust and heat, but to Lyra it was paradise. "You're safe here," Karen said finally. "For now." She adjusted her son in her arms. "And you?" He looked toward the door, his jaw tightening. "I broke my orders. They will not forget." For the first time, she saw something in him that wasn't strength or certainty. It was choice, heavy and deliberate. "You could leave," she said softly. "Let them take you. It would be easier." Karen's gaze met hers. Easier is not always the path worth walking. The truth beneath the ice. The geothermal station was a ghost of its former self. Pipes lined the walls, some sweating steam, others frozen solid. The air carried the sharp tang of minerals and old metal. But after weeks of cold so deep it gnawed her bones, Lyra welcomed the warmth. Karen led her through narrow corridors to a chamber with a low ceiling and a grated floor. Steam rose from vents beneath the grating, carrying blessed heat. He set his gear down and checked the seals on the doors. "They will not come inside," he said after a moment. "Not unless ordered." She lowered herself to the floor, leaning against the wall. Her son was asleep, wrapped securely in the thick cloak. "Why not?" she asked. "This place is not important to them, and they do not like the heat." That made sense, she supposed, though the thought of alien machines waiting just beyond the walls kept her stomach knotted. Karen knelt across from her, removing one gauntlet. His fingers, gray, ridged, and faintly metallic, moved with surprising precision as he adjusted the baby's blanket. "He is strong," Karen said quietly. Lyra arched a brow. "For a human." "For any." His gaze lifted to meet hers. "But your kind, you make strong in ways we do not." She tilted her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" Karen leaned back, the grating creaking under his weight. "My people, we value efficiency. We do not keep those who cannot survive on their own. The weak are allowed to fall." Lyra stared at him, anger flaring. "Allowed to fall? You mean you just leave them?" He didn't flinch. "It is practical. Resources are not wasted. The strong continue. The weak do not slow us." Her voice rose before she could stop it. "That's not strength, that's cowardice. You're afraid of what it costs to care for someone." Karen's molten eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no hostility, only curiosity. "You think caring makes you strong?" "I know it does." She shifted her son in her arms, brushing her fingers over his hair. "Strength isn't just surviving yourself. It's making sure someone else does too, even if it costs you." He was silent for a long time, as though weighing her words against something ingrained deep in him. Finally, he said, "We watch your kind. Many think you reckless. You settle on worlds that kill you. You build where storms destroy. You fight wars you cannot win. And still, you return." "That's not recklessness," she said firmly. "It's hope, and maybe stubbornness. But it's why we're still here." Karen tilted his head. "Your life is short. My people live many cycles. You will grow old before my face changes. Why do you fight for a future you will not see? Her answer came without hesitation. Because someone will. My son, his children, the people who come after me. That's the point. Something shifted in Karen's expression, the faintest crack in the mask of his composure. He looked down at the grating, his voice low. My people do not think this way. We fight only for what we will touch, for what we will own. And what's the point of owning anything if no one's left to inherit it? She asked. Karen didn't answer right away. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small metallic disc, etched with markings she didn't recognize. He turned it over in his hands, the etched lines catching the glow of the steam vents. This is the mark of my unit, he said. We are scouts. First to land, first to sea. We judge what is worth taking. She swallowed. So that's what you were doing out here? Deciding if my people are worth taking? Yes. There was no hesitation in his voice. And what did you decide? He set the disc down beside him, as if setting aside something heavier than its size. Before, I would have said, no. You are fragile, disorganized, wasteful. But now, he met her gaze. Now I think my people are wrong. Her breath caught. You endure, Karen continued. You protect the small ones. You fight storms you cannot win. And sometimes, you do win. That's what being human is, she said softly. We're not the biggest or the strongest, but we don't quit. Not when it matters. Karen's gaze drifted toward the door. They will come for me soon. My absence will be noticed. When they do, I may not be able to stop them. She tightened her hold on her son. Then we make sure we're gone before they get here. He gave a short, almost human smile. You think like one of us now. No, she said. I think like someone who has something to lose. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile. Karen adjusted his armor, checking the strange weapons at his side. Lyra watched him, realizing she no longer saw him as simply alien. He was Karen, the one who had stepped into the storm for her when no one else would. After a while, he rose. We leave at first light, he said. There is no light here, she reminded him. He paused, then inclined his head. Then we leave when the storm sleeps. The rescue. The storm eased sometime in the night. Lyra woke to stillness, broken only by the soft hiss of steam through the vents. The baby slept against her chest, his breath slow and warm. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe the danger had passed. Then she saw Karen, already geared up, standing at the door with his head slightly tilted, listening. They are close, he said without turning. Her heart tightened. The machines. Yes, and more. He glanced over his shoulder. A human skimmer approaches as well. They have heard your signal from the tower. Relief surged, then faltered. So what's the problem? The problem, Karen said, is that they will arrive at the same time. She understood immediately. Your people and mine. He nodded once. My commanders will not wish to reveal themselves. They will see me with you and assume. He didn't finish. Lyra shifted the baby in her arms. Assume what? That I have been compromised. And what happens then? Karen's jaw tightened. They will try to remove me, and they will not care what happens to you. A thin thread of fear curled through her chest, but she pushed it aside. So we move before they get here. Karen checked the charge on one of his strange weapons. We move now. They left the geothermal station at a fast pace, the frozen air cutting like knives after the warmth inside. The snow had settled into a light drift, but the cold was sharper than ever. Steam vents hissed in the distance, marking the station's heart. Karen led them across open ground, his eyes scanning the horizon. He moved with a predator's efficiency, quick but never rushed, every step calculated. Lyra followed close, her legs burning, the baby held snug against her. A sound split the air, a low, rhythmic thump that grew louder. She recognized it instantly, a skimmer's engine, pushing through atmosphere. At the same time, Karen stiffened. They are here. Shapes emerged from the snow haze, two human rescue craft gliding low to the ground, and farther off, the dark, angular silhouettes of alien dropships. Lyra's pulse spiked. They're going to meet right here. Karen didn't slow. We reached them first. Keep moving. The first rescue skimmer closed in, its lights cutting across the snow. A loudspeaker crackled, "Survivor, hold your position." But Karen didn't stop. The second dropship descended behind them, its landing struts sinking into the snow. The whine of alien engines was lower, more like a vibration in her bones than a sound in her ears. Figures emerged, tall like Karen, armored in the same dark plating, weapons slung at their sides. They moved in perfect formation, their glowing eyes fixed on him. One of them called out in their language, the words sharp and clipped. Karen answered in the same tone, his voice calm but carrying weight. The tone of the reply was anything but calm. "What are they saying?" Lyra asked. "They order me to step away from you," Karen said without looking at her. "To leave you for the humans." "That's good, isn't it?" "No," he said. "They also order me to return. Alone." The alien formation advanced. The human skimmer slid to a halt 20 meters away, its side door opening. A rescue officer stepped out, rifle raised, not aiming yet, but wary. The two groups stopped with Lyra and Karen caught between them. The alien leader spoke again, this time in halting human language. "Release the human. Come with us." Karen's voice was steady. "No." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You break orders. You endanger mission." Karen took a step forward, his body angled slightly toward Lyra as if shielding her. "I saw what you would not see. I found a mother who would die before leaving her child. I saw weakness, you say, but I saw strength greater than ours." The alien leader's gaze flicked to Lyra, then back. "Sentiment. Waste." Karen's reply was sharp, almost like a blade drawn. "It is what will make them outlast us." The leader's expression didn't change, but the tension in the air thickened. The human officer on the skimmer called out, "Step away from her." Karen turned his head slightly toward Lyra. "Go to them," he said softly. She shook her head. "Not without you." "That is not a choice you can make," he said. But she didn't move. One of the aliens shifted, weapon raising a fraction. Karen's own weapon came up instantly, the motion so fast she barely saw it. The human officer's rifle came up too. Now, every finger in the clearing was on a trigger. Karen spoke again to his commander, his voice low and deliberate. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the weight. The leader paused, then gestured sharply. The alien soldiers lowered their weapons, but only a fraction. Karen stepped backward toward the skimmer, never turning his back on them. Lyra followed, the baby tucked tight in her arms. When they reached the human rescue craft, Karen stopped. "You will be safe now," he said quietly. "You're coming with us," she said, more demand than plea. His molten eyes met hers for a moment, and she thought she saw regret there. "Not today." Before she could reply, he stepped back into the snow. The aliens closed around him, their formation shifting as they moved toward the dropship. The human officer pulled her inside the skimmer, the door sealing shut. As they lifted off, Lyra looked through the narrow viewport. Karen stood at the base of the dropship ramp, watching her. The engines roared, and then he was gone. The warmth that lingers. The rescue skimmer cut through the snowstorm like a blade, its engines leaving curling vapor trails in the frigid air. Lyra sat in the rear compartment, clutching her child as if the cold could still steal him away. The baby stirred, letting out a small whimper before settling against her chest. The hum of the engine was steady, but her heartbeat was not. The human rescue officer glanced at her from the cockpit. "You're lucky we found you when we did. 2 hours more," and he didn't finish. She didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the white horizon, though her mind was still in the clearing where Karen had stood. The image wouldn't fade. His tall frame, armor dark against the snow, molten eyes locked on hers as the dropship doors closed between them. The officer's voice softened. Was he one of them? Lyra's throat tightened. "Yes. You're saying an alien helped you survive." There was skepticism in his tone, but also a trace of something else. Curiosity, maybe even awe. "He didn't just help," she said. "He saved us. Over and over." The officer gave a low whistle. "Never thought I'd hear that." Neither had she. The skimmer brought them to a human outpost, steel walls wrapped in heat shielding, antennae bristling against the gray sky. Medics rushed them inside. Warmth enveloped her like a physical embrace, and the weight of exhaustion hit so suddenly her knees nearly buckled. They took the baby first, scanning him for frostbite, checking his vitals. Then they checked her, blood oxygen low, frost damage on her fingers, but nothing permanent. "You're both going to make it," the medic assured her. She nodded, but her chest felt heavy. Survival wasn't supposed to feel this hollow. 2 days passed. The baby slept more soundly now, cheeks no longer pale with cold. Lyra stayed in the outpost's small infirmary, wrapped in layers of warmth she barely noticed. She kept thinking about the geothermal station, the strange alien words she hadn't understood, and Karen's quiet refusal to obey his own kind. On the third morning, a knock came at her door. It was Commander Ellis, the officer in charge of the rescue mission. His uniform was crisp, his voice even. "You gave a report about your encounter," he said. "Mind telling me the whole thing, in your own words?" So she did. She told him about the freezing wind that had driven her into the geothermal station, the tall alien who had wordlessly given her warmth, the way he had carried her child without a trace of hesitation. She described the food he had offered her, the way he had stayed awake through the storm, the standoff between their people. Ellis listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he said, "Do you know why they were here?" She shook her head. "They've been mapping geothermal sites," he said. "We think they want the heat sources for their own colonization efforts. But this," he tapped a finger against the side of his leg, "this is different." "Different how?" "They don't break ranks," Ellis said simply. "They don't disobey. Not ever. You're telling me one of them defied orders for you?" "For my son," she corrected. He gave her a long look. "For both of you, then." She thought about that for a moment. "Maybe," she said quietly, "they don't see the difference." A week later, she was cleared to leave. Transport was arranged back to the settlement she had called home before the storm. The morning of her departure, a small sealed packet was delivered to her room. No one knew who had left it. Inside was a strip of metal, not human in design, etched with a pattern of lines that shimmered faintly when she turned it in the light. She recognized the shapes. Karen had worn the same pattern on the plate across his chest. On the back, in small human script, were 3 words. "Warmth is strength." She sat there for a long time, running her thumb over the ridged surface. It was impossible to know how it had reached her. Maybe a message sent through quiet channels. Maybe a favor called in by someone who owed him. But it was from him. She knew that as surely as she knew the shape of her child's hands. The settlement was quiet when she returned. Winter still had its icy grip, but the air felt less cruel now. Neighbors stopped her in the street, asking how she'd made it through. She gave them the simple version: rescued in the storm, taken to an outpost, returned home safe. But when she was alone, she told the full story to her son as he lay in her arms, even though he was too young to understand. She told him about the stranger who had shared his heat, who had carried them through the frozen dark, who had stood between her and death without hesitation. "Someday," she whispered, brushing her fingers over his hair, "you'll understand what that means, what it's worth." That night, she lit a small heater in her cabin. The flame's glow filled the space with a soft orange light, chasing the shadows into the corners. She held the strip of alien metal in her hand, the etched lines catching the firelight. It felt warm, though she knew it shouldn't. And for the first time since the storm, she allowed herself to believe that maybe Karen's words were true, that the thing his people called weakness was what would carry hers forward, that maybe one day, if their paths crossed again, she could return that warmth. Outside, the wind whispered across the snow. Inside, the heat lingered, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a tall figure in dark armor might have been looking up at the same gray sky, carrying a memory of the woman and the child he had once held in the cold. Closing notes on the HFY theme. The chapter ties back to the title. She prepared to die in the cold, but lived because someone chose compassion over protocol. The warmth is strength message encapsulates the HFY heart. The human trait of caring is seen as powerful enough to inspire even a rigid alien soldier to change. The ending leaves open the possibility of reunion without forcing it, keeping the tone bittersweet but hopeful.